You know, he's really he's shameless in intellectual argument. He's absolutely without character, a moral foundation, or even intellectual substance.
Welcome back to the Getting Lit podcast. Today we are doing the second part in our Grunts in Space series. We're doing The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, which is sort of like I guess people say it was very much heavily influenced by Starship Troopers, but I would say yes, but it is a very different book, but we'll talk about that. And I am joined again by GldPny, aka Erik. Welcome, Erik. He's flexing for us right now. Too bad I don't have video on my podcast.
I know, they can see.
They can see the gun show.
I'm happy to be back. Happy to be back. Loved doing the last one. Super stoked to do this one.
Yes, great. So, so the Forever War is basically very similar premise to Starship Troopers in that we follow a soldier in a future military. And he's sort of conscripted versus kind of a voluntary one in Starship Troopers. He's a physics student because, like, in this future scenario, the army conscripts only the best. You have to have like over 150 IQ, and it's like a United Nations army, which I always laugh at that. Whenever that's in the show, because like, could you imagine a United Nations army? But anyway, we can get
that was
into
the
that.
Concept of this, like Star Trek, gay space communism.
Yeah, pretty much.
That was the whole concept, right? It was like,
yeah,
everybody's united and one umbrella.
Yeah. So basically it follows this guy, and what's really interesting, his name is William Mandela, which people have often pointed out the way that Mandela is spelled is not Mandela like Nelson Mandela, but it's a kind of almost acronym for, not acronym, what's the word?
Analog? Synonym.
Anagram.
No, it's
anagram.
Anagram?
Yeah, anagram for Joe Haldeman's name. And so Haldeman went to Vietnam.
That's why he spelled it. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I did want to kind of talk about, but we don't have to do it first straight up. But like, it's often read as an allegory for Vietnam because Haldeman was a Vietnam vet. And obviously it has a very different approach to war and the military versus Heinlein. But in terms of the science fiction elements of this, one of the things that's really interesting is that he works in time dilation with this. So so we do have a kind of faster than light travel, but like they're called collapsars. So they're like, but you have to travel to them. So they're very far away. So they go at almost light speed to get there. So obviously there's relativistic time dilation, which means that the subjective time of the character is just normal, whereas like hundreds of years will pass on Earth as they're traveling back and forth to these sort of wormholes. So what we see is William traveling, out to do battles in this war, and then traveling back to Earth, and Earth being changed and the society changing around him as these time dilation effects happen. So we can get into like specific things as we go along, but like just our general thoughts about this. This was actually I don't think I'd read this one before, although there are bits to it that were familiar. So I feel like I might have read the original short story or something like that, anthology or whatever. But yeah, this is your third time reading it?
Third time reading. Yeah. I read it once when I was a kid, once when I was in college, and then once now I'm almost.
Yeah. So what's your history with it then? Like, what did you think about it then versus now or whatever?
Well, when I was a kid, so my dad's very liberal, very like loves Star Trek,
Yeah.
loves the idea, very like he loves the idea of being an anti-war hippie and being very much like power to the people, 60s revolution, free love, that whole thing. So when I was growing up, it was pitched to me like my dad's also ex-military too. So it was kind of like it kind of felt like to anybody who wasn't in Vietnam but loved these ideas of being like both a stooge for the government and being, a freewheeling sort of rebellious type of, rock and roll dude. Uh, this was like his dream come true. So when I was a kid, he was very much like, here's the coolest thing ever. And so I think at the time I sort of was like, yeah, okay, cool, this is cool. And then I didn't think about it for a long time. And then when I was 20, I reread it and I was like, oh, this is bullshit. Like, get out of here. Like, this is stupid. Because I was just at that point in time, I was about to go into the army. So I was feeling very like, the hippies are idiots and this is stupid. And like, my friends are in the war in Iraq. Like, we're here to like kill. We're here to serve. We're here to kill. Duty, honor, loyalty. And I was all in on like the military mindset at that point. Now, kind of having removal from both of those things, it was just it's a great sci-fi. He paints the military so accurately, as far as like Starship Troopers, everything is very philosophical and then sort of idealistic and romantic. But Haldeman talks about it like somebody who's really been there.
Yeah.
And even though like he uses, similar stuff that is fake technology, like mechs and collapsars and lasers and all these things, it's still very rooted in the reality. So I really enjoyed reading that and feeling like, well, plus I have a new guy at my work who just retired from 20 years in the military, and he joined when he was 18 and he's 38. So he spent his entire youth. So I've been like hanging out with this guy a lot while I read this and Starship Troopers. He just started at the same time about a month ago. So it's been fun because I've been having like these sort of revolving conversations while I'm reading these things. And, to kind of go from the fascist perspective to the very sort of liberal anti-war perspective, and then hear this guy's perspective and then kind of remember my own time. It's been a fun sort of 360 to like just be back at square one and be like, oh, this is a great story that has some truth to it, but is not too heavy handed. And anybody could enjoy it. I feel like Starship Troopers, anybody who's smart and has like a little bit of, some balls could enjoy that story. But I feel like Forever War is the kind of thing that anybody who likes sci-fi of any kind could enjoy.
Yeah, because
it's broader appeal.
Yeah, because it's got like the sciencey stuff that like the nerds would like, but it's got like, even like the battles. That's what I wanted to talk about, like first up as well, is that, we go through his training, which he goes to Karen, which is like which is interesting because that's a planetoid that's actually beyond Pluto. And he didn't actually know that existed at the time of writing, which is pretty funny. So he kind of predicted it. Maybe that's why they named it that when they discovered it. But
that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, but I don't know if it was actually still in the solar system in the book, but whatever. So it goes through his like basic training with this like powered armor, which is very similar to Starship Troopers with the powered armor stuff. And then we go out and he goes to his first battle. And then what's really interesting about all of the battles is that, I haven't been in the military, obviously, but I've heard stories and like, from an army family, how so much of the military, this is my dad always said, is that so much of the military is just waiting around. Like,
hurry up and wait is the phrase.
Yeah. And like, this book really kind of captures that, I think, in a way that I don't think Starship Troopers kind of does. Like, because Starship Troopers is all like dick on the table, like really action stuff when it does do that, when it's not philosophizing. But this is like the slow journey out to the collapsar, then getting there, and then like waiting to be dropped down into the battle. Battle's really like chaotic or whatever,
Chaotic, yeah.
or nothing,
Sloppy.
yeah, or nothing happens, and then back to base, and it's just that like, and but most of
Right.
the book is literally just waiting around,
But
and
that's what makes it so accurate as to
mm,
the military.
mm,
Plus, like, even in the battle, like, yeah, it's like in the military, you're like, okay, you get orders, you go here, they train.
mm,
People are injured or killed during training, right? So they're already suffering casualties. They haven't even done anything.
mm,
That's real in the military. There's
mm,
always like things that you don't hear about is people dying. Some people, a lot of people who were killed in Iraq were killed on base on accident.
mm.
That stuff happens. I knew a guy who was pinned between two armored vehicles, backing one of them out,
Oh, damn.
and he was crushed and killed. Or there's friendly fire incidents, or there's equipment malfunctions, or there's misfires, or there's somebody has a weak blood vessel and has a stroke. You don't know
Mm,
about it, and they just push themselves too hard in the heat. You know, like there's all these unaccounted for things that happen, or not unaccounted for, but unexpected things that happen before you even get to the battle. And then when they
mm.
finally get to the battle, yeah, it's like chaos, and then they're like, okay, that was it, and they're like, what? And they don't even know what happened. And it's just
Mm.
on to the next thing and then wait. And then when they finally get to their first person to person battle, it's bullshit.
Yeah.
It's a bullshit thing. And
Mm,
obviously I wasn't in Vietnam, but the way that he describes, especially that first portion, is like, well, of course that's probably what Vietnam was like.
mm.
They get acclimated in the country next to Vietnam, then they go to their staging area. Then the first people they probably encounter were just like some random town folk with
Yeah.
like horses. And then they're like, "What is that them?" And they go, "No, no, it's just some people." And then they finally encounter somebody, and those people don't even know what's going on because it's so early on in the war that they're like,
Yeah.
the whole country doesn't know they're at war yet,
Yeah. And they don't even know what Taurans look like as well. That's the other
right?
thing that, so like
Because they're
there
so
could be a
alien. Yeah,
Tauran, like that's
right,
the Taurans are the aliens that they're at war with. Um and then there's the little teddy bear things that they
right.
just
They're
like
like the
mow
local
down.
animals.
Yeah, yeah. I got like a tardigrade. That's what I was picturing, a little tardigrade sort of
Yeah,
thing,
like a
oversized.
little sort of like weird, fluffy,
Yeah.
ugly looking version of a ant, like a mammal.
Yeah. But yeah, so we get that, and then that happens, and then he comes back to Earth in 2024, which is pretty funny. Where he comes back to an Earth where everyone is gay.
Well, before that, he comes back in 2007.
Oh, that's
He
right.
comes back
Yes,
in
yes, yes, yeah.
2007, and everything is like is like rationed and
Yes, yeah,
sort of
yeah.
more communistic.
Yeah.
And everybody it's like a communist world, but everybody's rationed in calories instead
Yeah.
of money.
The money is calories, yeah.
Right, exactly. And then it sucks because it's so crime ridden, and there's like, there's government funded crops, and everybody's sort of living on the dole, and it kind of sucks. And so he re-enlists. And then when he re-enlists, when he goes back to the military, everybody is one third of the population is gay.
Mm,
So he's considered sort of outdated.
mm.
But then when he goes back the second time, then the whole world is gay.
Yeah.
And they start calling him the old queer,
Yes, it's
which
so
is
great.
which is
It's
fantastic.
it's so funny to read that now because like reading that in I guess the 70s it would be like, whoa, man. But like it's
Yeah.
just sort of like kind of a bit funny now. But I like how he's just it is pretty, forward thinking in a way. Like because it just like
For the time it was, for
yeah,
sure.
because it just sort of talks about it like he extends like this idea, I think, of in some ways it's very like libtarded because it's sort of like you know socially constructed sexual identities. It's not like an innate thing, even though that goes against like the whole born this way idea. um but he's sort of saying that like it's all socially kind of mediated because but it's so the homosexual thing is that people are kind of encouraged, incentivized, and then eventually coerced into being
Yeah, well, then they're genetically,
bred
then they're
into
bred to be homosexuals
yeah
after
yeah
that,
yeah in order
as a
to
form of eugenics. Yeah.
in order to curb overpopulation,
Well,
which is funny because it's like that was such a thing in science fiction in the 20th century, is like overpopulation, and it just really hasn't been borne out, you know.
well, overpopulation and climate change, right,
Hmm.
are the two predictions of like liberal science, like the Council of Elders.
Yeah.
Their predictions have been like that we will suffer from overpopulation and then global collapse because of starvation and economic burden. And essentially just like if you can visualize the planet getting too heavy with the fattened pigs of humanity who are just raping the earth continuously,
Hmm.
and the tired earth just gives up the whore that she is and just like submits to being like raped to death and plundered by just like vicious white men with, just greedy maws open wide, sucking the life out of her. And she's just like, no, I wanted to give you good, but you didn't want it. And the only people who can save it are the noble scientists who are like, what is their solution? Get rid of most of the population, right? That's really the solution. So what's actually funny is that even though Haldeman is very obviously like progressive, libtarded, sort of taking that position, he also, this is a common thing I noticed from 90s libs, my dad's generation, they were also fully aware that like there was a two-sided edge to their thoughts. My dad is a really good example because he loved people like George Carlin, right? Who's like the ultimate libtard. And his stuff was like, yeah, abortion's great. Give me 50 of them. Ha 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 ha. In your face, you stupid, stuffy old white guys. And then on the other hand, though, they would talk about like the loss of humanity and how science is sort of going to turn us all into like totalitarian bugmen. So there was always this sort of understanding, and that's what Joel Haldeman, every time he goes back to Earth, it's some new progressive policy, but it's always like a bizarre thing that doesn't necessarily benefit human.
Yeah.
Right. He goes back and now they're rationing off food. So, okay, we've covered all the needs, but the only thing that we have now is food. Well, people are starving. People are doing black market jobs to get extra calories. There's stick-up men everywhere. Rape and murder, like, are common occurrences, and you need to be constantly protected. Okay, then he leaves and he comes back. Now everybody's homosexual to curb, overpopulation. But it's alienated people for the most part from whatever was bonding people before. And he, feeling alienated, was like, well, he even kind of is like, hey, I've always been cool with the idea. Like, don't worry about me, guys.
Yeah.
I'm not judging you. But then he immediately sort of lays into how far humanity has gotten from the natural aspect of humanity, which is the bond between a man and a woman, and the fact that a family plays a role in keeping society. Why are we here if we have no reason to procreate, right? It's kind of like, it's kind of the same thing where, that's a good point to ask somebody, like, why would you get married if you weren't going to have kids?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, but also it really like resonates nicely with the idea of the war itself. Like, and I think this is something that obviously a Vietnam War vet would ask, which would be, what are we actually fighting for here? Because it's like, ostensibly when you go away to war, you are fighting for those families to continue. That's
your way of life.
Yeah, that's the idealistic, like, but as you said in the last episode, what you're actually fighting for is the empire, at least in
it's not. But
like,
it is.
It's about the answer to that question. I'm not saying, I'm not talking about it in realpolitik sort of sense. I'm just saying that, like,
no, that is a good question. What are we fighting for if it's changed every time we come back? We're no longer fighting for what we're no longer fighting for the thing that was that set us off on our journey to begin with.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, I thought too, though, is that just like Starship Troopers, they were very openly like, we want to colonize space before the bad guys do, right? And if we can do it in peace with them, we will. But if not, we're going to kill them.
Mm.
These guys are kind of like, we're doing it to protect our people against this threat, right? Which is always, I think, the liberal sort of justification of like, we got to do the right thing, right? That's the liberal justification for war. If the fascist one is like, we're going to do this because it strengthens the might of our empire, the liberal one is like, we got to do this because we have to protect all of the people, right? Because it's the right thing to do. But what they actually end up doing is just colonizing planet after planet after planet, like in the name of like, we're going to do the right thing at any cost. You know what I mean? Like hands around your neck, like I'm here to save you.
Yeah.
So they achieve the same ends regardless. It doesn't matter how much the world changes. It doesn't matter how much what we were fighting for changes. We don't even understand what's coming next. It doesn't matter. We're here to serve the needs of the army. We're here to serve the needs of the empire. And it becomes more and more alienating, but it becomes more and more endless as it becomes more and more alienating. Which is, I imagine, how Vietnam probably felt after it lost popular support. Because then what, like 10 years, Vietnam lasted for 12 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. Think about that. The protests ended in like 60, I think the last protest was in 73. All we see in the retroactive stories, movies like Forrest Gump and things like that, born in the 4th of July, is this idea that America was so against this that we had this hippie revolution that rose up. But that actually only lasted for a year and a half. People just kind of lost interest and moved on to other things.
But it's such like a cultural touchstone, like this novel and all of these things. And I feel like it's a generational thing because the boomers were such a productive generation, like not just economically, artistically, or whatever. So that meant a lot to a lot of their artists. But like Afghanistan went on like almost twice, like it's almost double the time that Vietnam went on, and like
Vietnam went on for 20 years.
Yeah, 20 years,
55 to 75.
Oh, really?
55 to 75. That's the Indochina Vietnamese.
Yeah,
I'm
but the
looking
US
at the Wikipedia right now.
was the US like the US wasn't sending troops until like later.
I don't know. No, they weren't, but they were still. If you think about,
because it was the French first, because it was a French colony,
right? Right, and then in the United States, but it still went on. Still, the war that was happening in Vietnam total though was still a 20-year war.
Yeah.
And then Afghanistan had two, right? They had the Russians, and then they had us for 2001 to, I mean, what 2001 Biden?
Yeah,
it's 22 years.
Yeah,
but two war fronts for 22 years, and then while Barack Obama was in office, it was 5. Right, it was 5 war fronts for a strong period of that time. And then, but what did we do? We pulled out of Afghanistan, and we just continued all of our other secret wars. If I was a Mandela in this modern military in the United States, I would feel like the country's never been out. What's the difference between time dilation is just like the only thing that would allow one man to see the history of America, which is endless war. It's just war after war after war. I mean, we've had one here, and the reason I place so much emphasis on the U.S. is because my country, more than any others in the modern world, has been at continuous war that has involved everybody else, whether they like it or not. Whereas previously, like if Hungary went to war with some other empire right next door to it, that would only affect those two countries, maybe a third one as a staging area. But our war is like, well, Australia's involved, China's involved, Thailand's involved, Indonesia, like the whole entire Indochina islands, the chain is involved because like these guys are the ones who are supplying all of our equipment. These ones who are the ones who are manufacturing stuff. We get all of our beef from New Zealand. Like, everybody's a part of the chain to the point where it almost feels like, just like in Forever War, the war has to keep going because it's half the world's economy.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the American wars. It's kind of like, at this point, it's like, we have no reason to be involved in anything we're involved in with Ukraine and Israel. Not really. but we have to be involved because there's so many supply chains that require economy to flow that like the US has to stay involved. We started laundering our money to stay involved.
Well, the US like has, and no one ever talks about this, I guess, because it's kind of like probably gets you on a list if you talk about it. But the Ukraine thing, like, is basically, if you look at it strategically, I guess it's sort of like the US coming in, and it's an imperial thing for the US because it's like the US coming into Europe and like the US supplying the energy needs of Europe as opposed to Russia.
Right.
So it's like, but they'll tell you that, oh no, this is about Ukraine. This is about like how evil Putin is or whatever. But like no one ever looks at any of that stuff because to look at that would to people feel like, I guess, that if you kind of say something like that, it means like you're a supporter of Putin or whatever. Like, but it's
you
like,
love Russia. You're a redcoat.
Because because the US can't possibly be doing anything like in its interest.
Bad.
You know? Yeah.
No, well, that's the thing, right? So was a
US totally did. Yeah, it didn't blow up that like pipeline that went straight to
the,
Russia, the Nord Stream.
It wasn't the CIA. It was It was Russia.
It was Russia. Yeah, self-sabotaging itself.
Yeah. One of the number one oil suppliers in the entire planet, whose number one stronghold is their oil production, sabotage their own oil lines because they just wanted to get back at it so good. But it's what's Norm Macdonald said. He's like, you ever read a history book? He was like, it's a good thing that the good guys won every time. You know, it's pretty lucky, isn't it? Like, it is one of those things where you're like, you know, history is written by the winners and not necessarily the good people. And Russia is one of those things where, well, let's just put it out on paper here. I mean, let's just break it down out on paper. But Ukraine is one of the number one human trafficking sites of the world, right? Mail order bride. Babies, whatever you want to say. They have several of their battalions are open neo-Nazi regimes that are openly calling for like the destruction of Israel. You know, we sent them $110 billion, like more aid than we've ever given anybody besides Israel, and they're not going to win. They never were going to win. We found a bunch of the weapons that we sent them were sold to other countries on the black market and are being used in the war on Gaza, or the genocide on Gaza.
Money not being spent on your own citizens as well.
Right. And also it's like, well, yeah. And also like, who says they even got any of that money? That money was getting laundered, right? So there's so many points of corruption. And on the other hand, all you have is Russia, who, I'm not saying that Putin's a good guy, but I'm saying he's been consistent in his position, which is I don't want NATO taking over. NATO's trying to stage in Ukraine against me. Ukraine is a part of the Soviet Union. I don't want America to use NATO as a staging ground. You know what I mean? Like, it's been consistently like, stop trying to take over Russia. Stop trying to take over Russia. Quit saying you're not and quit doing the thing. It's like the kind of thing where if me and you are standing towards each other and I walk toward you with a knife and you say, hey, what are you doing? I say, I'm not doing anything at all. And you go and you back up and I say, what? Don't back up. And you go, but you're coming at me with a knife. And I keep getting closer. And every time I get closer, I become more aggressive. And every time you put up your hands and say, I don't want anything bad to happen, I keep stabbing at you and going, nothing bad is happening. Quit flinching. You know, it's a psychological warfare as well. And it's psychological warfare that is being placed on the world, including America, who, you know, most people, it's not that they either support or don't support the war. They have no clue what's going, they have no involvement. It's not about us. It has nothing to do with us. If things were cheaper back home, if iPhones were actually costing less, if gas was costing less, but we've been in a period of inflation and downturn and recession. And so they've been just, as far as we feel, we're trapped and our money is being spent on causes that we don't agree with. So just like Forever War, these guys are like, what's going on? Where are we? Oh, we're 400 years from where we started. We have no idea what's going on. We don't know what's happening with anybody else. And we're going to be thrown out into the middle of another situation that we have no clue how it's going to end up. And we're dealing with relativistic time on both ends. Not only are we dealing with our own time dilation, we're dealing with the enemy's time dilation because they're traveling from a different point to a different point. So now we're meeting up or we're not meeting up in two
And
different time spaces.
yeah, and the funny thing about that as well is like the which I thought was a really sly point about military intelligence as well, is like our intelligence suggests that the Taurans are like this, they're only this
Right,
advanced, but because of those time dilation effects, they'll be
right.
like 10 years advanced than what they thought they were, and then like
Yeah,
part
their
of part of
technology. Yeah,
yeah, part of fighting them is working out how far along they are, but even that will be outdated by the time they kind of go back to base or whatever. But like
right.
it's interesting like how yeah, what we're saying about all of the em empire stuff as well, like the idea that um the idea that Vietnam vets came back from that war and realized that, it wasn't part of that is like kind of I think a lot of people realizing the truth about America being an empire, right? Because I think
Right.
prior to that, it was all, the whole gee whiz, like,
World War
the
II, Greatest Generation.
yeah, and because that's a thing as well. World War II, I think, is an aberration of a war because it was like very clearly, I mean, it's not this simple, but it was very clearly a situation of a a kind of axis of powers trying to expand, right? And then
Right. It was good versus evil. It was good
yeah,
versus evil.
yeah,
That's the way it was sold to the
yeah,
act. There was the axis of evil, and then there was the alliance.
yeah.
Right.
But there was
Even
different. There was different that was even different again to World War One because World War One was just a clusterfuck because it was just
right.
like various empires, just like and treaties and like just this
Right.
fucking mess that was in Europe. Whereas, so it was really messy. Whereas, like it was sort of like in a way, World War Two was for most people was just very clear cut. Like the
Yeah.
Nazis are the
That's
bad
how it was
guys,
sold to us, and
Yeah,
it's been sold to us. Like I think about this a lot as far as like
I do
as much
think
as I like.
that is the truth for that war more than any others, though. Like
I think
that
that's the truth for that one more than
yeah,
any others in the
mm,
sense that like that is what we know of it. But I
yeah,
think that like if ever there was a psyop that was actually real, it was the period between the wars, World War One and Two,
mm,
and everything that happened afterwards up until Vietnam, because
mm,
it was this whole period of time where like espionage became a major factor in international war.
mm,
So what people were actually involved in and what we know was actually the average troop on the ground and the average person back home knew about the same amount of information that was going on. Whereas the governments were playing 4D chess and they
yeah,
were using spies and the proto CIA and things like that and KGB. The average soldier though, he was just fighting a war of good versus evil.
mm,
So it was sort of more analogous to what was people were being told. There
mm,
was more information and there was more of like a concentrated effort on both sides. Like now we have history to, in retrospect, understand that like the Nazis had their reasons, the
mm,
Russians had their reasons, the English had their reasons, and we had ours.
mm,
And yeah, like it's not good to genocide a people. And but it's even worse if you're fucking with America, if you're trying to take over land that we that's the real lesson of history.
yeah,
It's like you don't get to decide what we'll let you because this is the thing. We supported the Nazis right up until we didn't.
yeah,
We had the American Fascist Party. We were all in on Nazi, and then suddenly we weren't. And I believe that it was around the time that we weren't. It was around the time that two things happened. One, they started to take tactical land that we preferred. And the second thing was the Russians were starting to win against them. And the
mm,
Russians, that is out. We need to get them. So suddenly you go, oh, I can't fight the Russians and these guys. I can fight with these guys, but these guys have, they got bigger eyes than I thought they did.
mm,
And it seems like they have bigger bellies.
mm,
America can't have that happen. We need to be the real empire. We need to be the real ones. And I think that, it's a clever thing. But Vietnam came along and it was suddenly like, why are we even in this?
mm,
There's news reporters, there are journalists, there's embedded cameramen. we see what's going on over here. It's horrendous. Nobody supports this. Our troops are coming back in body bags by the thousands, and we're not making headway. Suddenly you have a failure on your hands, and it's being televised.
Mm.
You know,
the empire gets its blood nose, and it's not that it's never had a blood nose before. It's that it was televised, that people knew about
televised.
it. So you couldn't
Exactly.
like manage the perception of like not. I mean, obviously they tried to manage the perception, and who knows, everything that we know about Vietnam, there could be, other sides to it, obviously.
Oh, sure, of course.
But yeah, it was I think it was the first time where they couldn't manage those perceptions, and people saw saw the US as an empire, and saw that it was an empire that could, it wasn't that it was being defeated, but it could,
it wasn't winning.
It wasn't winning either.
It wasn't winning.
Yeah.
It wasn't winning. And that's the thing, is like, to be America is to win.
Yes. Yeah.
In the minds of Americans and the world. And that is part of our strength. But then also you had a third thing that was happening, which was communism had taken root in America in the 40s. And what it did was infiltrated entertainment, and it infiltrated the universities. When that took place, and then they found out that, oh, wait, not only are they fighting a group of people and we don't know why, they're also fighting communists.
So that's bad.
That's bad. You can't do that. You can't fight communists. No, well, according to students, you can't. So the students led their revolt. And who was involved in that were actors and musicians and beatniks and hippies. And all of these things sort of became this confluence of creativity versus the machine. And the machine was, it wasn't the U.S. imperial machine. It was the machine that killed the human spirit. And that's what they were selling to the youth. Through art, through musicians. You had people like Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie. You had people singing "This Land Is Our Land." You had people who were using the spirit of American exceptionalism against American exceptionalism in the form of the imperial war machine. Suddenly it was, guitars with "This machine kills fascists," because it was the fascist machine killing the human spirit. And to have that propaganda is such a powerful tool that there's no way that you can't sway a young mind with passion. That's why, somebody asked the other day on Twitter, why do you guys always refer to illegal immigrants by using the phrase military age men? Because we're talking about 18 to 30-year-old men, right? And what is an 18 to 30-year-old man? It is a person who is the strongest and fastest and most passionate he'll ever be. And he's also simultaneously the most impressionable and emotional and uncontrolled he'll ever be.
And dangerous.
No thing is more dangerous than an 18-year-old man with a will. Because his hormones and his brain are in two different developmental stages. His body is ready for everything. And his brain has not matured yet to match what is going on in his heart, which is a beautiful thing. It's one of the things that makes young men so beautiful and wonderful is their love. They're so on fire for life. But it's what makes them so deadly. Because if you put it in their head that the key to your life is to kill this person for this righteous cause, you've just set a mechanism upon the world. And it is something that is glorious in history books, and it's something that is glorious on the page and in film, but in reality it is a terrifying and dangerous thing. So I think that there is something so powerful about that ideology being used, and they use it against Vietnam, and they use it against Vietnam, and they use it against America, and they were right to an extent. America shouldn't have been in Vietnam, but we were tackling the communist regime. We were tackling the Torrens, this enemy who, that was what I thought in the first battle. Why are they fighting these guys? Because the first battle, it's clear these guys don't know how to fight. And in the second battle, it's the same thing. They've caught up, but it doesn't really seem like they know how to battle. It
That's
seems
something
very
that's,
often the
yeah,
Taurens don't know really how to fight necessarily.
that's something that comes out at the end of the book when he's reading the basically history of the war, which
Right,
started because of a misunderstanding essentially. But it also talks about how the Taurens weren't a warlike people, so they had to learn how to fight like
right,
throughout the eras,
right.
because the humans were basically, turns out the humans kind of, it was a misunderstanding, and the
There's a
humans
misunderstanding, but it seems very much like the humans
caused it.
instigated the whole
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
And it seems even like they
But
instigated it with that first battle,
yes, yeah, yeah. They
which
just
is
mowed
part of,
everything down.
well, that's also part of the military misinformation thing and the
Mm,
perception of the public. When they went to training, they were told that, like, you guys, the enemy's so dangerous and everything's so bad, and you don't know what you're prepared for. But in reality, when they showed up, you get the sense that actually they've never fought these guys before.
mm, mm.
That was all bullshit they were told by their commanding officer to get them in the military mindset.
Hmm.
But nobody had ever encountered. They didn't even know what the Taurens looked like when they finally put boots on them. So
Yeah,
then you realize that these guys are fighting somebody who they're fighting a group that doesn't know they're in war. And then that's part of the whole entire psychological operation. And the book even is not unreliable narrator, but unreliable dictator.
yes, yeah.
Mandela only knew what he was told. He was just getting orders from somebody. So as far as he knew, okay, we're going to fight these guys. But it didn't mean that the military wasn't lying to him about their entire mission to start with.
Mm, mm. And one of the things that you mentioned it before, I just wanted to go back to that, like the idea, the political elements of this in terms of, I don't know, Joe Haldeman's politics, but I agree with you that it's probably like liberal leaning, but it is very, like you said, like your dad's like the George Carlin kind of type, which is, whatever, get abortions, free love, whatever. But
Right.
there's a difference between that and modern day libtardism, because it's like, one, it's not as feverish, but also there is a skepticism of over-engineering humanity, and that kind of comes out in the book itself, where like,
Right.
these societies that he comes back to are just really shit, because it's like it reveals a skepticism about the Soviet style kind of like command economy, like, working things out from on high, having commissars and stuff dole out literal calories to people as the economy,
Right.
and then like instituting various sorts of social programs such as like mandatory homosexuality and like growing people in vats instead of like the old-fashioned way. But I guess what I'm getting at there is that this is, while it is not, and is in some way is a reaction to Starship Troopers, it's considered a reaction to it in the sense of it trying to do a more liberal version of it,
Mhm.
a kind of liberal corrective, if you will, to
Right.
Starship Troopers. It's very skeptical about the kind of more communist worldview. So he's not, I think if Joe Haldeman existed today, like, I think he's still alive, but if that kind of writer existed today, it wouldn't just stop there. It would actually, no, actually, all of this is good. It's good that we're curbing overpopulation. It's good that like
Right.
we organize society in a much more logical way. That's the political difference between, I think, boomer liberals back then or whatever versus now. Like
Right.
they wanna be they think technocracy is great, whereas they have this like, Haldeman has a skepticism about it.
No, I agree with you. I think the thing is that like the boomer libs, like they, even though they ushered in like the coexist bumper sticker, they also ushered in the concept of like the beauty of human individuality.
Yes.
And they were very much champions of that. Like even down to the concept of free love.
Hmm.
Free love is in the book, they have the mandatory sexual arrangement between the male and
Yes.
female
Yeah.
soldiers, but they do that as a method. I mean, that's obviously a guy who had been in the military. Like, God, if there was only women here that we could sleep with, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like him thinking of like what would be the dream scenario, But I see a lot of that free love stuff too isn't necessarily with the boomer libs, it wasn't couched in misogyny. It was sort of, they really had this idea like everybody just have a good time and be cool and everything would be cool and good. Right? Consequence for, hey, don't worry about it. We're all
Yeah.
cool, then we're all cool. We can all be this way, man.
Yeah,
You know
and
what
it
I
wasn't.
mean?
It's often said that it was sort of misogynistic, but the kind of poster boys for like the total free love were people like Bowie and stuff who like flirted with like bisexuality. So it wasn't just
Mhm.
about like fucking as many women as you wanted, you know?
No, it was all part of this idea of total human liberation and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the idea that like we're all individual people who are all having a human experience together.
Mm,
So it's utopian in a sense, but it's also naive because, well, I don't want to say it's naive. I take that back. It wasn't meant to be naive. I think there was actually something that was like a little bit more chill about the whole thing
mm,
because just like Haldeman, there was sort of this idea that like I shared time with this person. We come and go as we please, but there's a mutual respect and care for one another. It makes us close,
mm,
right? We know that, like, just like you said, like Haldeman now would be like, well, people should be sleepy. People should be in a polyamorous relationship. That's how everybody should be. It shouldn't be
mm,
a choice. It should
mm,
be that's the way the world should be, and it should be engineered that way. Whereas with Forever War, eventually he settled into having a long-term partner.
mm,
Eventually it was sort of this idea that like, well, while we're young and carefree and things are up in the air, like let's all just be free. But eventually they still pair bonded and found companionship and love. And there was even the idea that like when everybody was homosexual in the future, there was still people who had long-term relationships. They hint at more or less one or two people who had, eschewed the sleep together schedule and gone into like long-term couple.
mm,
So there was still this idea of like monogamy and normalcy and sort of like societal structure
mm,
that nowadays I think it would be laughed at from a modern liberal perspective, not because it's bad or it doesn't work or isn't what people want, but because it would be archaic compared to what the true scientific council would really see fit.
mm,
But like you said about the 90s libs, they had a healthy skepticism of institutions. They didn't trust big pharma. They didn't trust the government. They didn't trust the news channels. They didn't trust all these people because these are the people that lied to them and they lied to their parents about Vietnam.
mm-hmm.
So our parents growing up in the 80s and 90s who were boomer libs, Gen X libs, they were like, hey man, the institutions are bad. This is all bad. Free love, these concepts, these are good, but they're good because they get us out of the cycle of imperialism and sort of the stuffy orthodoxy of Catholicism that ran America at the time. That was all sort of rooted in with like Cold War, like this whole big conflagration of like Cold War, espionage, Reaganite, Catholic, evil, the evil
Mm,
empire,
mm,
which would culminate or would reach ahead with things like Rage Against the Machine, Bush era 9/11 sort
mm-hmm.
of take back the streets
Yeah,
mentality.
and
That
look at Tom Morello now.
oh, well, look at where all of that led to us. Look
Yeah,
at the BLM riots.
yeah.
I mean, all of those people were just like Ben and Jerry's ice cream. They were hippies,
Mm,
and they're all the people who sold us hippie stuff are the same people who now are selling us socialism and communism,
mm,
and they're all rich. Why are the
mm,
rich always selling normal people to give up their individuality, to give up their economic freedom, or at least potential for it? Give
mm,
up money. Why would a rich person like Hassan want to give up all of his money for socialism?
mm. Yeah,
Why
it is
would Ben
weird.
and Jerry, the hippies who made, how much is Ben and Jerry's ice cream? Tom Morello was worth $30 million. I've looked that up. You know what I mean? These guys are all rich, and they got rich selling us revolution and
Mm,
this idea of communism. And then they made off like bandits, and the rest of us are just like holding the bag, you
yeah.
know?
Rage
And
Against
and,
the
and
Machine, you are the machine. Like
Exactly. All of these people became the machine. All the hippies became the yippies, right? That's what that led into. It's even with him though. Like they have a psychological evaluation of Mandela at one point in the book, and they go, "Well, you're a pacifist, but you're a failed pacifist, and actually, you're kind of cut out for this." And actually, if you really wanted to, you could really be great at this. Also, it seems like you really want to push your ideas on people, but not your will. That was such a telling moment in the book about his character. You want to push your ideas on people, but not your will. So he still had like a little, I don't want to call it piety, but he had a little bit of virtue, knowing that he didn't want to force his will onto people. But he still thought his ideas were the correct ideas.
Yes. Yeah.
He still believed that he knew better. And that was the truth. And he admitted that about himself. And I think that was an admittance, about halfway through the book, where he goes from being a lieutenant, I wouldn't even say halfway, but 2/3 of the way, he goes from being a lieutenant to being a major, suddenly being like a big command. And they do the psych eval on him when he's under, and it tells him, hey, look, man, you want this on some level. You know what I mean? You're not just some victim. You could have left and went off and really been a pacifist at any point in time if you wanted to. And you had money and you had the opportunity, but you keep coming back for a reason. And I think that speaks to his generation, because a lot of those people didn't just burn out after Vietnam. A lot of them went on to become movers and shakers in the 70s, which is something that they don't talk about in TV shows and movies. No. They just talk about this burned out, like dead-eyed sort of, I've seen things that nobody should ever see,
Because those are the people that those are the people that didn't sort of survive and thrive, and those people are kind of idealized and romanticized in a way, like Born on the 4th of July. Like you see that in Forrest Gump as well. Yeah,
the cannon fodder.
But like it's almost like the other thing as well in terms of the military perspective that's interesting is he keeps going back to the society and just doesn't. It's almost like he goes back to the army because the army doesn't change. Like, you might argue with this based on like what you've experienced, because obviously you've been in the military and I haven't, but like the army is more or less the same over time. Like, there's a chain of command, there's like ranks that you reach and you follow orders, and it's very stable in that way. And I've seen
shitty coffee.
Yeah. And I've seen this like where, because what I used to do, I got this for a brief period of time. I had this job that my dad got me, which was when he got out of the army, he sort of joined up with this company which helped ex-military people transition into the civilian workforce. And I would basically just take what they've done in the army and kind of write up their CV or resume. I don't know what you call it in the US, but yeah. So I would just organize it, and that's what I would do. I just write it up.
Yeah, make it look nice.
But so many of these people went to civilian life and just didn't want to they just went back to the army. That's
the thing, right? Is like one thing that you said, like about how it never changes. They show him every single time that he goes back in with a new rank in a new situation. They've upgraded the suits, they've upgraded the weapons, they've upgraded everything. But he always gets a cup of coffee, and it's always terrible coffee. And the lounges are always like the most empty, barren, shitty places. And even their transport to battle is always terrible. And the transport back is always nice. And it shows, like, I laughed at that, like, more than anything about the accuracy of the military of, like, I was talking to the guy who just got out after 20 years, and I got out 11 years ago, March 31st, 2013. And I was talking to him, like, what's changed? Like, what's it been like for the last 11 years? Because I was only in for 5. He did 20. So I was like, like you say, you weren't in the military, but I was. Well, he was in for 20 years. I was only in for 5. So, like, he had a completely different experience. And, what he told me was, like, it was like I was right there. It was like nothing changed at all. Now, they have trans people now. And he did talk about that. He didn't care. He's like, yeah, I don't know. I had a bunch of trans soldiers. And then he made a couple of little trans jokes, but then he was like, but, they're really good soldiers, too. Like, there's no matter what, he'll never deviate from that.
Hmm.
He'll always be that guy, right? And in his mind, he'll always be in that place. And even now, he's like, well, I don't know. Sometimes I think maybe I shouldn't have got out. Sometimes I think I should go back in. And I'm like, they're still serving the same shitty coffee.
Hmm.
No matter what, you're still going to go to that same stupid little officers lounge or enlisted lounge, and they're going to have the same shitty coffee and the same like broken ping pong table and the same stack of like board games. They can have all the technology in the world. He was literally in the army for, with time dilation, 1143 years.
Hmm.
And in his last mission, they still had the worst coffee in the worst officers lounge on the most high tech ship that they've ever could have possibly conceived of at the time.
Hmm.
And that right there is like the most real military thing that you can think of. Because they'll do that.
Yeah, and
here's laser guns,
Yeah.
here's laser guns, and then the worst amenities possible. Because you're in the army. Who gives a fuck?
And but there's a comfort to that as well, particularly but it's not just about the time dilation, the science fictional thing. It's also about like going back into a society, because the army is a society in and of itself, right? But
Yeah,
you go back
it
into
is.
the civilian society, which is another kind of society. And
Right.
one thing that he references in this book is this idea of, which would have been new at the time he wrote it, but because the idea of future shock, about this
Right.
idea of like modernity like progressing so fast that people just can't cope with it, like that.
Mhm.
And now it's
Yeah,
gotten
you
to a
can't catch
point.
up with it.
Yeah. Whereas like the army has this sort of like stability, and I think like he's very purposely kind of referencing that. I can't remember which chapter it's in, but referencing that to sort of illustrate that while it's really fucked up that like this is a sly kind of imperial war in a way, and war is bad, like every other like liberal anti-war
Right.
book. It acknowledges the reasons why a soldier stays in the army, like because
Right.
it's like society has changed so much by the time you get back from war, and even if it hasn't that much, you've changed, and so there's
Right. You've changed.
you
You don't
see
fit
things
in.
in a different way. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you don't
So,
fit in. Well, I'll say this. I'll say this. When I got out of the army, I went into hair school because my mom told me that a handsome straight man would make a lot of money doing women's hair, and I thought that that was a really good idea.
and did you?
And I did. I became a celebrity hairdresser, and I did really well, actually. Any men out there, just so you know, the hair industry is dominated mostly by gay men, but there are a lot of straight men who go in there and they completely clean up because women want to have good hair. They don't care how much it costs, and they want to be made to feel good by a handsome man.
Hmm. And gay men
So,
love straight men too. So there might
gay
be a
men love
bit.
straight
There
men.
might be.
Also, gay men though they get to do two things. They get to make a woman look really good, which I think appeals to the more I guess you would call it like vaginal envy that a lot of gay men sort of experience, which is like wishing you could be this thing. That's your avatar, right?
Hmm.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I have observed from working with many gay men my whole entire life. There's very much like there's a reason Madonna was surrounded by gay men.
Yeah, that's a certain
And
type
there,
of gay man. I don't
it
think I
is,
have
it
that
is.
because I'm not like a really feminine gay man. So I have like,
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of gay men have that. Definitely. I know what you're talking
There,
about.
you know what I'm talking about. I'm not saying it's
Yeah, yeah,
everybody, but there's
yeah.
definitely that there. And that's a big thing in the hair industry.
Mm.
There's also this other aspect of it too, which is like a creator sort of like God complex that gay men get with beautiful women, where they're like, I have made you, now go destroy. And
Yes.
that was a big thing with hair too. I worked with this guy, his name's Guy Rillian. His name was Guy. What's the guy named Guy?
Okay.
He worked on what's that movie? It's very famous in Twitter, but not in the rest of the world. Nocturnal Animals. He did all
Oh
of the
yeah.
hair for the opening scene with the really obese ladies with the crazy. And when I was working with him, he was telling me about how he did this Tom Ford, the whole thing. And he was like holding court in the salon while he was telling us about his experience on the set. Now, I worked with like Angelina Jolie's hairdresser. I worked with like name an it girl from 2014 to 2022. Okay. And I worked with their hairdresser, Taylor Swift, all of Lana Del Rey, the whole kit and caboodle. But he's holding court. He's telling us this story about how he did this thing and about how pleased Tom Ford was. You know what I mean? And I'm telling you, this man was like, in his mind, this was his Roman general, how he defeated the Hun army. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This was like how he sacked Greece or whatever. Like this was for him, it wasn't just like, oh, I'm a gay man who's mincing around and I do hair. This was like a different thing. This was like, I have achieved this thing and I cut the lion's head off and I hold it up before you type. So there was that masculine aspect of it. But if you're a straight guy, you just go in there and you just zhuzh them up, flip their hair. And then afterwards you're like, oh, you're so hot, you're so sexy. And then they look at you and they're like, oh my God, I just paid this guy, a lot of money, who's very handsome in this fancy place where they wait on your hand and foot and they make you feel like the queen. And now look how good I look because of my relationship.
Did you ever, this is probably disrespectful because you're talking to me on your wife's laptop, but like, did you ever?
It's my laptop. It's her account.
Okay. Were you with your wife at the time?
On and off.
Okay. Did you ever pull?
Yeah. What are you saying?
Did you ever pull when you were?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, you made my hair look so beautiful. Now fucking mess it up.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of that going on. There's definitely a lot of that going on. There's definitely a lot of that going on. But, during a period of time.
No more comment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, yes. Yes. That being said, though, not as much of that as you think. Because a big part of it was...
They think you're gay?
No, not even that. Because they had the same thing with the gay men. They always wanted to sleep with the gay because it could have forbidden fruit. But a big part of it is they go for the experience. Because when you go to a Beverly Hills salon, especially because I worked in 3 of the top 5, the only one I didn't work on was Surge. There's 2 that I Surge, and there was one other one that was in England. But Mesh, Ramirez, Tran, Jonathan, and George, you go in, there's an experience. Oh, but I say all that to say this. When I got out of the army and I went to hair school, I had a really hard time. I had like a full-on like meltdown one time, and one of my teachers was like, "What's wrong?" My teacher, who was like young, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Nobody gives a fuck about anybody here. Nobody cares about anybody here." At the end of the day, nobody helps clean up. We're all supposed to clean up the classroom, and I'd be sweeping alone, wiping down everybody would do like a half-ass job and do the bare minimum. I wasn't used to that. I was used to the military where everybody would look out for another. You do your best. And then if somebody's not doing it, everybody would come down on you like a fucking stack of bricks. If you had a problem and you couldn't do your best, everyone would gather around you and help you out. Right? So there was a bond. I don't want to say brotherhood because there was women there too. There was a family ship there. Leaving that is very hard. Because when you go into society after you've been in the military, you are institutionalized. And everybody around you does not care about it. They are not institutionalized. They don't even think about each other. All they think about in the civilian world is themselves. In the military, you are a communist. All you think about is everybody. You don't think about yourself until last. And you only think about yourself in relation to everybody else. How does my fitness, my military fitness, impact the team? How does my health impact the team? My uniform, everything about how and they would tell you constantly, if you fucked up at home, you're going to be fucked up on the battlefield. So then you come to civilian life and nobody cares about each other. Just like Mandela, people are sticking them up. People are trying to rape. People are trying to kill. His own mom, she's there for him, but she's sort of like just as lost as she is. And Mary Gay, his lover, she's kind of in the same situation where like she's trying to adjust to her life, but she probably blends in better. but then society doesn't allow her to,
Mm.
by circumstance.
Mm.
So it's like so then you even have a person like Mary Gay, who in the story does not want to fight, does not want to have any part of it. She's not like Mandela, who like kind of has it in him, but doesn't want it. She doesn't want it at all and doesn't really have it in her, but has to go anyways because there's just no place left for these people.
Mm.
And I think that is the thing, is why so many military people are homeless in America. Because they get out even after 4 years. But 4 years is enough time when you're a young person and you've been institutionalized and brainwashed. You don't know how to adjust to a society that doesn't care about you, doesn't want you, and doesn't need you.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah,
So,
which is why I think that's another reason why it's rich material for like boomers to write about and make movies about and stuff like that, because
absolutely.
It's a very human emotion, even if not specific, like
Yeah.
you don't feel like you're being cared about or whatever. So it's like and it's something that he gets to here, which I think that was the thing I took away from this, is that Mandela especially has a sort of resignation to his fate in a way, because it's I can't exist in this society, so I may as well go and continue existing in the military society. There are like sparks of places where they could exist, but even that is sort of, I love the scene when he goes to the pleasure planet Heaven,
Yeah.
which is like this jungle planet where he goes there to recover. And it seems all nice and everything, but everyone else, it's weird for him because the way that they speak is so different, like tonally, like
Right.
they emphasize the wrong kind of vowels that he's used to. So it becomes this, and of course at this point as well, everyone's homosexual. And one of the phrases in it, which I find really funny, and was like, kind of, most people who've reviewed this book say it's kind of homophobic, but like I'm just like, so true. Where he's like, oh, I don't really have a problem with homosexuals, but when there's like too many of them, it's too much, And I'm like,
Yeah.
so true.
That's
But
really funny.
yeah, but yeah, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so even in these kind of Arcadian sort of scenes where where they find a place when they're on shore leave. And by the way, because of time dilation and everything, they end up becoming billionaires because of
accumulated
compound interest.
Yeah.
But inflation is so high that it doesn't
it kind of evens out.
Yeah.
They burn through half their money in 6 months.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, just going but doing everything.
Yeah, and so, but then because this is the thing that's an interesting tension about it as well. There's underlying a lot of it is a lot of the stuff we've been talking about in terms of like war being this instrument of empire or whatever. But it's not explicitly said like that, but it's there. It kind of says at the end of it, like, so basically he thinks Mary Gay is dead at one point, his partner, but like works out, he gets a letter from her and she says that she's on this planet near a collapsar, and she's like, come and meet me or whatever. So he ends up doing
she's in cryostasis.
Yeah.
Waiting for him.
Yeah. And so he does that, and then they end up on this planet, which is like this heterosexual haven, like refuge of like
right from the rest of the universe.
This alternative commune kind of hippie planet where they're like, let's try heterosexuality, like it. So, but what I'm getting at there.
Well, his friend converts at the end too, which kind of adds into that. His friend's like, I'm gonna try it out. They said they could change me back if I don't like it.
Yeah, but it's like, in a way, it sort of suggests this idea that like, in this vast interstellar empire now, there are now more choices because there's more space and there's a planet for everyone. Like there's this interesting tension there between like being kind of expansionist war, imperial stuff, but also like it kind of needed to expand in order to accommodate them in a way. Like,
humanity is too cooped up on this one ball, and if we could just get out far enough, then there will be enough space for everybody to kind of have their own thing. But we have to also evolve to this point where like, by this time, this is the end of the book that he's describing. By this time, also, the main portion of humanity is a hive mind collective.
A clones,
Earth.
asexual clones.
Asexual clones that are all part of one consciousness.
Yeah.
And then they have these enclaves of different kinds of humanity, homosexuals and heterosexuals and whatever else we can dream
It's like
of
Twitter.
on these other planets. It is like Twitter.
Lots of asexuals.
The asexual clones and the bots have taken over, and the rest of us are just trying to find small enclaves in which to spend the rest of our lives. It's dead internet.
Yeah, like ducking and weaving the pussies in bios and
exactly.
Yeah.
No, but that's the thing though, right? Like, so that's like the end of the book is like he like the world. It's been 1,100 years, and things. It took everything had to evolve to a point to where humanity could survive on its own without destroying something else. So they do sort of reach like I'd say like the liberal imperial utopia in the end, which is like actually it turns out that like we did it. We were right. We expanded throughout the entire universe. We figured out the war thing. Don't worry about that. Sorry that we did that for 1,100 years, but we figured it out. It was also a big misunderstanding because that's like the liberal.
Yeah.
If we could all just talk and communicate, right? Because that was also something my dad had this like sort of. Conor Oberst had a song. If you walk away, I'll walk away. Just tell me which road you will take. And it was this idea. The whole song is this anti-war song. He wrote it during, and it's a very emotional song. I love that song, and I get teary-eyed when I listen to it. But there is still this sort of like libtarded sentiment of like, if we just looked each other in the eyes and saw one another's humanity, we would immediately drop our weapons. We would kiss, and then we would part and go along our merry way. Right? That's humanity doesn't really want.
Yeah.
It's these evil guys. They won't. The rest of us, we just all want to get along, right? And so that's what they arrive at the end of the book. Hey, we figured out it was all just a big misunderstanding. They went their way, we went our way. We expanded the globe. Homosexuals took over the universe, and there's a small little place for you normies to go live over here on this rock. Oh, and clones are humanity now. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So there is sort of like this what you see now in like the super ultra retarded thing that is very much like the cold, sterile, like, yes, actually, it is good to have a medical team on hand 24 hours a day to make sure that you're properly dilated and hormoned and pilled and drugged and kept
and never have an
normal.
orgasm again. Yeah.
Yeah. And never have a bad feeling again either. You have to always be like in a constant state of like neutral happiness, well, it worked. Right. But it worked because of what these guys did. Whereas actually what happened is, if Mandela came back to Earth during our time, he'd see what they have now, which is just his ideals played out in reality. There isn't a long enough timeline because eventually all things turn into some form of totalitarianism, which is, I think, it's why Haldeman's book, because they did. I mean, the clone hive mind, in the end, that was what humanity became. It just had little pockets that they allowed to live. But eventually the solution was, well, actually, yeah, we do need like a plan to come. But we just have to erase all individuality.
Yeah, it works if we, just don't have any individuals and we're all in a hive mind. It's like,
exactly.
Well, that's
so no matter
totalitarianism.
What, it still arrives at that conclusion, but in the end, he's kind of like, but isn't that good? And you're like, okay. But just like the boomer lives, it's only good because he gets to reunite him and his buddy.
Yeah.
Him and his buddy who he made get to go, he reunites with his lady and they live on a paradise island. So it's only good for everybody because it's good for him.
Yeah.
And that is sort of the boomer lib mentality. It's like, hey, it benefits me. I don't see the problem here.
Yeah. Like that boomer mentality, boomer lib mentality of like just the looking into each other's eyes, communicating thing. Like that is see, I love the boomers. I'm not like most millennials who like just hate them.
I like them too. No, I love them. They love the party.
They basically came of age in a period of like glorious economic prosperity, which was not the norm, right? So they can't help the time that they were born into, okay? And so I feel like that is what influences their naivety about these certain things. Like the idea that if we just communicate, man, because they come out of a context which was very, they come out of an abundance context where like everything they wanted, like it's not that they didn't work for anything or got everything on a silver platter, but you know, you could step out
There's
and
just
go
more to
get
go
a
around.
yeah, you could just go out and get a job. Like that's why
Yeah.
it's so funny when like older people, when I was younger, and I was looking for a job, they were just like, "Oh, pound the pavements," and like that's not
Right.
how
Did
it
you pass
works.
out a
And
resume? You
yeah,
know?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not how it
Yeah,
works
dude.
anymore. Like you can't
Right.
just like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I think I did that. Thanks.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you're like, of course. Yeah.
but like that's just what they were brought up in. They were brought up in that kind of society and
Yeah, you take the
economy.
help wanted sign off the door when you
Yeah,
walk in and you shake
yeah.
somebody's hand, look them in the eye, and they throw you a dish towel and they go, get back there and get to work.
Yeah. So
Thanks, man.
if someone can just like, you know, rise up through the ladder, just working hard really easily, not have to like, you know, to afford things for one, like have separate jobs as well, like so to make ends meet. If you just
Right.
like at the same job at the same company for your entire life, things are pretty good. Obviously, and everyone's in that boat. Obviously, you're going to view disagreement or like ideological like differences as just a matter of like comfort, you know, like
Right.
that
Right.
we'll just all be like comfortable together if we just like talk, hash it out, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, there's also, I think, too, like they had a lot of, because they were raised by the greatest generation and then they had so much prosperity, they were told, they were told the bootstrap mentality, right? They
yes.
were taught that, but they didn't have to apply it. They
Mm,
still had to work. They still had to do what they had to do. I'm not trying to take away from anybody's accomplishment because I'm sure that they were still out there actually,
mm,
putting like, their nose to the grindstone. But when the wheels grease and it actually produces, it's a lot different than when you have to push and it does nothing for you. And there's 50 other people who need that
mm.
wheel to push too.
You all
It
got your
becomes a
syringes in the stone trying to get blood out of it, you
exactly,
know? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And that's the thing is it's like that's the thing is the world also how do I put this? The world also actually became better and more efficient and more comfortable as a product of that, but we had less to go around. So
Mm,
there was also more people.
mm,
Because now, like, come on. Life's easier than it's ever been.
mm,
You got the cell phones, laptops, people make a living podcasting. Like,
mhm.
there's more opportunities for people who. I had a friend who's a Twitch streamer, and she was like, hey, I really like your stories on Instagram. You're really goofy. Have you ever considered streaming on Twitch? And I was like, no, I don't even know what that is. Like I understand the
I'm too
concept. Like I
old.
don't, yeah, I was like, I don't, you know what I mean? But she's like my age.
Yeah.
She was like, you're not too old. Why? She's like, hey, the world doesn't work like that these days.
Mm,
And kind of gave me like a little like reality check. She was like, this isn't how the world works these days.
mm.
She's like, you have this idea. And maybe it works that way for you, but that's not actually how everybody else is. And I'm not saying like this isn't my announcement that I'm now on Twitch stream. I'm just saying it made me reposition my mentality of like just like they don't get it, we don't get it either.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very important point. Yeah.
That's the thing is like we are now them.
Mm.
And those same people who were telling you when you were 15 or whatever, hey, what have you, got to get out there and pound the paper, go pass out resume, go shake somebody's hand. You know, that's us now going like, well, did you go to college?
Yeah.
Oh, did
Yeah.
you get on LinkedIn? Did you email them? Have you been social? Like, are you friends with them on Twitter? Like, what are you doing? Are you following them on Instagram? Have you read their about me? It's the same thing. And then a Zoomer goes, what do you don't do that. Just get on, you're on Twitch. So what? Somebody's going to want to watch a 40-year-old dude with tattoos talk about technically. It's like, why wouldn't they? That's a niche. And
Actually,
you
now that you
go,
say that, I would watch that. I would watch the shit out of that.
so there you go, right? And then I remember when I was younger, I had the same mentality where I'd look at somebody and somebody like, well, you can't do this, and I'd look at them and go, why not?
Mm,
I can do whatever I want to. But we lose that as we get older, right? We lose that with
mm,
experience. So it is funny because Forever War, they kind of do the same thing where like he kind of goes from I guess I could do this. To by the end of it, he's like, I have no idea. It is a joke that I'm a major. I don't even know how to command. What is
Mm.
going on? This has just been a series of failing upwards.
Mm.
And then it all kind of works out in the end. And then he sort of rides off into the sunset.
Yeah. Well, how thinks of that. However, he gets he gets out alive from a really like kind of serious battle, but in a funny
Right.
way, which I
But in a
found.
hilarious way.
Yeah, yeah. Which
It's a
is just
complete
like,
catastrophe.
yeah. So like he has this stasis field basically, which prevents they can't. It's opaque, so they can't see out, so they can't see what the enemy is doing. And basically they get down to having. That's the other thing about this book that's funny is like they train in all of these like archaic weapons as well. Like they're
Right.
training with like swords and spears and
Right.
chakrams
Just
and
in case.
yeah, just in case. Um, so yeah, the Taurans attack this base, and then what they end up doing is moving the stasis field and like leaving the bombs outside these nukes basically. And then they just like reduce this like planetoid to like
To
molten
nothing.
rock.
Yeah. To like nothing.
And they
just,
like peek their
destroy
heads
fucking-
out like when they think
Yeah.
it's cooled down or whatever.
Yeah. And then they're fine.
Yeah,
Like
they're
it goes from being like this hopeless situation to where everybody's like about to mutiny and they're outnumbered to suddenly they're reduced by half through this like series of like stupid things. And then they just start throwing spears at the enemy and just like these things are the Taurans are so stupid still, even though they can fight in interstellar space war, they can't go hand to hand still.
Mm.
And the humans just end up like essentially throwing their spears back at them and just
Mm.
killing them by the hundreds with the most like archaic weapons.
Bows and arrows as well, yeah.
Bows and arrows, yeah, and just sharpened poles.
Mm.
And yeah, and then they sort of scoot along their little containment unit like a Looney Tunes cartoon, like moving a hut. And they just drop the bombs out there, kill everybody, and it's totally fine. And but it's funny though because you read it and you're like, oh my god, like it's finally because all the other battles are kind of the same thing where like it's like one series of fuck ups and accidents, which is kind of like real life.
Mm.
You know, it doesn't go as like just like the Starship Troopers was like everything's a perfectly planned thing, and then something goes horrible.
Yeah,
but like heroically, the good guy comes out on top. In this situation, it's kind of like, well, we fucked that up, and somehow we made it out alive.
yeah.
And you know
Time to
what?
go
And then
home.
they go, right. And then they go, what was the end of? And they go, well, you guys won.
Mm.
And they go, we did. They go, yeah. Well, when you guys fucked up and you accidentally got crushed by your own spaceship, it set off a bomb and they accidentally blew themselves up.
Mm.
Because it kind of shows like the not just like the failure of organic beings in like disorganization, but also that like things go bad in bad situations when people are panicking and they don't no amount of training or drugs or like because they have all these like hypnotic drugs, post hypnotic suggestive drugs, they still don't operate cleanly because ultimately people just start freaking out.
Mm.
Ultimately, that's what happens. Every time they get into battle, the army tries all these different things. They give them upgraded weapons. They do all this training on them. They kind of give them like Matrix style information downloads, and they put them through post hypnotic suggestion to get them in the mentality to be able to fight clear headed and tactically. But the second that their instincts kick in, it all goes to shit, and then something fucking just goes off the wrong way.
Mm.
But that happens in real life.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the thing that's so funny about it is like at the end when because that battle goes on a lot longer than the other battles. And it's like, you're like, oh, wow, he's finally going to bite it. He's a major. He's made it 1,000 years. He's one of like 5 people who's made it through the entire war. He's finally about to meet his end. It's only a couple pages left. And then like by hook or crook, he just sort of fails upwards again.
Mm.
And it's funny because you're like, of course.
Yeah.
Of course he just skated by.
And it's not unrealistic too. It's just so true. So many people that's just how they go through life.
Yeah.
One of the things that I just wanted to mention before we wrap up is the book actually when it was first released was much shorter. So I don't know which edition you've got, but I've
I
got
got
the
the
SF
I got
Marks the
the
Worst one.
the preferred edition
Yeah, so that's
that
good.
he
That's
has the foreword. He talked about how this is his
Yeah,
final tome or whatever.
because what the publisher originally did was they took out a lot of the stuff back on Earth, especially around like everyone being gay. Um, and
In the 70s, that wasn't going over well.
but I think it was less about the gay stuff and more about the they didn't think it like it flowed well, but like
Okay.
I think it's extremely readable, and I think those segments are really important to ram home that idea that I was talking about the going back and forth between these two, the hermetically sealed society of the army versus the more capacious idea of society in civilian life, and the changes, articulating the changes, and I think that's it's part of the tension in the character of William Mandela as well. Like he's not into this war, but the war is in some sense all he's got, you know.
Right.
Um,
Well, I think that I read one of the other versions because I think there's three different print editions,
mm,
and I read one of them, and the one difference I saw was that when he went back to Earth, there was a different version
mm.
of what happened,
I
and
think it's shortened or something.
well, it's also different because they they have drugs
Mm,
in the version that I read. People on Earth they get drugs like pot,
yeah.
cocaine, these things. They're like mailed to them by the government.
Mm,
And most of the people this is it's sort of like a why they did the calories thing, but because everybody was like unemployed, they were on the dole, and they were like receiving mandatory drugs and food, everybody got really fat.
mm,
So it was the cause of the calorie thing.
mm,
So they didn't go into the whole story of him and Mary Gay traveling around the world or getting into the shootout where he killed the guy or looking
mm,
for the black market job. It was just he went back to Earth. Everybody was on drugs and fat and had like no purpose to live. People were getting like suicide pills sent in the mail if they decided to off, like to quiet us from children and men. And so I remember reading that and not seeing it in this version of the book, and I thought maybe like I made it up in my head. Like I was like, oh, maybe I'm just misremembering this.
mm.
But no, there's then in the introduction he talks about how there's multiple print editions.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's
He
maybe
does.
something to look out for.
Yeah. I think in most newer versions you'll find the right kind of version of it.
Yeah.
Um, but Eric, what or GldPny? I don't know what you want me to call you.
GldPony's
But
fine. I'm doing a new
yeah.
project for that's going to come out in 2025.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Do you want to
and
tell us about it?
I can't tell you about it. This one's going to be top
Ah,
secret, and I
okay.
have people. I'm working on it. I'm going to
Hmm.
say this: it's going to be a separate thing from GldPony. I'm still going by GldPony. I'm not
Hmm.
retiring that name, but I'm going to release a new album as GldPony pretty soon.
Hmm.
It's called GldPony Goes to the Vampire Disco Club, and
Amazing.
it's probably my most We Live in a Society type of record, but
Hmm.
it's a disco record. So um
Love
yeah.
that.
So I mean it's gonna that now when I say disco, I mean if anybody's listened to GldPony music, it's my version of what
Yeah,
disco
yeah,
sounds
yeah,
like.
yeah, of course.
Grain of salt on that. But there's it's all dance songs. So
Mm,
it's like 9 or maybe 10, depending on what I do.
that's
So
awesome.
I'm gonna work on the next thing, and the next thing is gonna be very different.
All right.
It's gonna
So
be much more professional, is what I
okay.
was saying.
And where should people find you? We said this in the last episode, but where do you want them to go?
GLDPNY, GLDPNY,
Hmm.
Instagram and GLDPNY. That's it. GLDPNY.
Hmm. Instagram, Twitter,
Twitter.
Spotify, Bandcamp.
Yes.
Are you on Apple
All that.
Music as well? I don't know
Apple
it.
Music as well. I use Apple Music as a whole.
Yeah. So do I.
Everybody's like, that's the old people thing. I'm like, well, there's a reason that adults use it because it's more organized and it's easier to navigate.
Yeah.
Spotify is chaotic. I
Yeah.
don't get it. I don't like it.
Well, thanks for joining me on this military SF journey. Did you have anything to
Yes,
say about like both books or, anything in
I
general you'd
did.
like to finish?
One thing we didn't touch on that I wanted to, and I kept thinking about it when I read both of them, was
Mm.
the mech armor.
Hmm.
Heinlein created mech armor. So anime and a lot of sci-fi owes Heinlein an incredible amount to mech armor.
Mm-hmm.
Haldeman takes the mech armor even farther and really hammers it out. But just like he owes so much to Heinlein, I just want to say that William Gibson owes so much to Haldeman because even though Forever War is not cyberpunk, everything in the Neuromancer series is directly influenced by the Forever War. And the more I was reading this, the more that I was like, William Gibson had to have been a fan of this book.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things in it that I was like, I could see where that led to. There's a through line there. So if you like mechs, if you like war, if you like cyberpunk, I would say the trajectory should be you should start with Starship Troopers and then Forever War and then read Neuromancer. Because there's a through line through all of this that, and economically, politically, socially, even that, there's a through line there that, you know, Gibson's liberal, Haldeman's obviously anti-war. I understand that Heinlein was soapboxing a little bit about his whole fascist thing, but there's still like this is where it all leads.
Yeah.
In Neuromancer. Neuromancer is sort of like whatever the sprawl is, I see the seeds of that all the way through these things. There's a shadow of that.
I would even add to that, and I'd probably put our last episode that we did before Starship Troopers, I would put Bester in front of Heinlein before Starship
Absolutely.
Troopers.
You're totally right with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's spot on.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Thanks for that. That's it's been great to talk to you. I love talking to you about classic sci-fi. You're my favorite person to do it with. So
I'm honored. I love it.
It's been my honor and pleasure. So thanks again for joining me.
Smells they consummate my home. Beyond the black horizon, trying to take control. See my girl, she shivers in her bones. The sun is and it's rising, trying to take